Joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast is the owner of the Grapevine location of the Discovery Center company, Snapology, Melanie Galaviz. Welcome to the
Hello.
show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, Melanie. Your friend Elisa connected the two of us and felt like you would be a perfect fit for the show. I appreciated our conversation that we had when you and I spoke previously. You're just really open with a lot of what your story is about and just your resilience and just everything that you went through really impacted me just in that short conversation that I thought, yeah, what Melanie has to say is going to really help other women. And then just the trajectory of what your life has unfolded already, I think is going to be pretty powerful for people to hear. And so I'd like you to just start us off and share about how you met your husband and the story of your quick marriage at the age of 22.
Yeah, it was quick. I was 21 when I met him, and, probably typical of that age, had been through several not great relationships. And I had kind of made that decision on my own that I was going to be alone, that I didn't need to chase a guy or be with a guy to be happy, and ended up with an opportunity to move out of our area to go open a retail store in a new environment. It was kind of the job that I was in, or in a new city. And so I kind of was having like the best summer ever. Like my friends and I decided that summer I was moving Labor Day weekend. And so we were just going to have the best summer and hang out with all our friends. And we were all 21 and we were really into bands and going to bars. And, so it was just that vibe of a summer. And my best friend Heather and I had decided, Zach, who ended up being my husband, we really liked him. We really liked hanging out with him, like in our friend group, but we did not like his girlfriend at all. She was so whatever. I'm not going to talk bad about her, but that was just kind of the vibe of that summer. So we kind of made a mission to like get rid of her, to get him to break up with her, like so childish way back then. But that was really our mission. We wanted to have the best summer ever, and we wanted to surround ourselves with all the cool people that we loved hanging out with and not have to deal with the people we didn't. So because I was clearly not coming from a place of trying to get with a guy, I really ended up spending a whole lot of time with him that summer just talking about relationships, right? And about what we're going to do in our lives. And, I'm moving to Corpus and this is my dreams. And, he was doing his thing in band and music, and that was his dreams. And so there was this couple of months, 2 or 3 months, that we just hung out with no expectation. Neither one of us were trying to impress each other, trying to date each other. We were just hanging, right? And then as the summer went on, as we got closer and closer to Labor Day, we really were hanging out a whole lot more. And there was one night, like I had already moved out of my apartment and was in my parents' house waiting for like a week before I was going to move, right? And so I had mattresses on the floor, and I just remember we were laying on the mattress on the floor just talking, and we both kind of, like, it just hit both of us that we had fallen in love through that summer,
Wow.
right? And I was about to leave. So we hadn't kissed, we hadn't, like nothing, because he had a girlfriend, remember? So that night we were sitting there and we both just kind of came to the conclusion, and he was like, I'm going home now. I'm going to pack my stuff. I'm moving out. I'm breaking up with her. And he just did, right? And so he left. He just went and left that relationship. But I was moving in like 7 days. And so he moved me down to Corpus. So he went with me. So it was me and him in a U-Haul, like when you're 21, like you do. And moved down there, got moved in. He came back home. We're both in college. So I had transferred down to A&M down there, and he was still in college up here. And we just stayed in contact, and I came home all the time and he came down there, and by Christmas he had moved down to Corpus with me.
Wow.
So we had made it official. So basically from Labor Day to Christmas, he transferred schools, he moved up into my school, and it was when I was moving that Labor Day, we were like, we're going to be together for the rest of our lives. We might as well just do this, And so we just kind of did. So the story of how I met him is, it's one of my favorite stories. And I love to tell it to people because I think certainly being in the dating scene later in life, having to go back to the dating scene, there's this, you're always trying to impress, right? And you're always trying to show up for someone and, be beautiful. But really, the love that I felt for him in that connection came from just being yourself, and just getting to know someone. And recreating that has been impossible. I have definitely tried to find ways in later relationships, but that was kind of how we met. And we ended up getting married in a very similar way, and I can tell you that story too. But go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to hear that. Well, even as you were sharing the story, I was thinking, like, kind of just what you said. I was like, man, I mean, just the fact that there weren't these expectations of like, I got to be my best self, my best behavior. Like, you were really just being yourself, and he was being himself. You were being your true versions of yourself around one another, which is why you did fall in love with each other, because you could do that without any strings attached to it. So Melanie, tell us about how the wedding happened. Or the marriage.
We both worked in retail. So he moved to Corpus with us, and it was actually the next September. So we really had only known each other a little over a year, even at that. And in retail, there's certain times of year that we do inventory, right? And so it's like a required, you can't ask off, and no vacations and that kind of stuff. But his 21st birthday was coming up, and we wanted to go to Vegas for his 21st birthday. But I had to work because it was inventory weekend, but it was his 21st birthday, right? So we were at dinner and in a restaurant in Corpus, and I was like, okay, how are we going to figure this out? How am I going to get my boss to let me off work so we can go to Vegas? And he said, well, you should tell her we're going to get married. And I was like, perfect. She has to let me off if I tell her we're going to get married. And so we were eating dinner and we were like, yeah, that's the plan. And then a little while later, I was like, well, what do we do when we come back and we're not married? And he was like, oh. I was like, well, I'll just say we chickened out. Like, who gets married in Vegas and, runs off and does all that? I'll just say we chickened out. And he was like, yeah. So we kind of agreed. And then by the end of dinner, he was like, well, I mean, why don't we get married? We can get married on my birthday. We can get married by Elvis. He was a huge rockabilly musician, right? With the pompadour and like the whole thing. So I was like, all right, if you buy me a ring, I'll marry you. And the next day we went and got a ring. And then we were like 6 weeks away from his birthday, so booked flight, like a layover back in Dallas, because that's where all our friends are, and invited all of our friends and family to lunch. We had a long layover, and then we were like, yay, we're getting married. And we told everyone. And everyone's like, oh, that's so great. When are you getting married? We're like, tomorrow, in Vegas, with no one there. His brother knew, and he was going to come. And one of my really good friends knew, and he and his wife were coming. And that was it, And so we did. We went to Vegas, and we got married by Elvis in the little Silver Bell wedding chapel that Rachel and Ross got married in on Friends, right? So this was that time. So we thought we were so cool. We got the T-shirt, like the whole thing, right? And then came back. Of course, my parents were very not happy. They wanted to be at a wedding. I was their first daughter, So I had made an agreement with my parents that if you want a wedding, you can throw a wedding on our first year anniversary. I will show up. I will wear a dress. I will taste cake. That's all I will do. You can do everything else. And we can do it if you really want to. Because it's like, why spend all that money when we're already married, Yeah. And we ended up doing that, and I'm really glad we did. And we'll get into that as well. So that's how we ended up in Vegas and got married. And Sharon did let me off work, so it worked.
Thanks, Sharon. Appreciate you. Now, okay. So we heard your parents' response. What were like some other close friends? Like, what did they think about this quick? Hey, we're getting married tomorrow.
Yeah, no one was surprised. No one was telling us not to. Like, really, my mom was the only one that was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And everyone else was like, yeah, of course you are. That's what you guys do. That totally fits. So it was widely accepted. Yeah, and encouraged.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't think anyone
Well,
thought we would actually go through with it, though, when we were like, tomorrow, so there may have been a little like, yeah, 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 in there too.
yeah, and then when they found out, they're like, "Oh, okay, we
Yeah,
figured they
that
would,
was
but we
it.
weren't sure."
It worked. Yep.
Yeah. Well, so Melanie, when you and I spoke, you told me that 3 weeks after your marriage, something changed with your
Mhm.
husband. What happened
Yeah.
there?
So we actually got married on September 14th, which was the day after his birthday, and came back to Corpus. We were in college and working in the mall, right? And in October in the mall, there is nothing going on. So he worked at a place with a bunch of guys that like to prank like they were just those, young pranksters in the mall or whatever. And
Mhm.
so one of them called my store. I was working down the hall, called my store and was like, "Hey, Zach is on the ground. He's hurt. You need to come. You need to come." I was like, "I can't leave my store. I'm the only keyed person in the store, And they were like, "No, no, no, you need to come." And the whole time I was like, they're messing with me. They're trying to
Mm.
prank me, and I walk in and Zach's like literally on the floor in this store. And I was like, "Well, what's going on?" And they said, he fell, they were horse playing, whatever. So call an ambulance, like go to the hospital, the whole deal. He's in excruciating pain. And that's all I could like tell, like his back was really, really, really hurt. So we go and to the emergency room. And because we had only been married a couple weeks, he wasn't on my insurance yet. And back then in the late 90s, it was like I had to fill it out on paper and fax it in. And, so it wasn't like doing things online. We didn't have computers that did all that then. So it was there was a lag in the timing and coverage and stuff. So he didn't have insurance. And this was a really big deal because here we are, early 20s, 21, I'm 22, tattooed, working in skate shops, and no one would believe him that he was hurt. And the only thing they would do was an x-ray because we didn't have money to pay for anything else, right? So they did an x-ray and they couldn't find anything wrong. They said, it's muscle, here's some muscle, relaxers, wouldn't give him pain medicine. We felt like we were being treated like we were drug seeking, like they
Mm.
were very resistant to anything he was saying. But meanwhile, he's screaming in pain and he can't stand up and he can't, like he's hunched and he can't stand and he can't sit. And, it was just a really terrible and scary situation because no one believed him, and I'm sure we looked like those stereotypical kids that probably do, like those things do happen, but it was very, it was very frustrating, So here I am, like the crazy girl screaming at people in the emergency room because they're wheeling him out. Like, we're not going to do anything for you. You got to go home. And I'm in this place of like, what am I going to do with him? We live on a
Yeah.
third floor. He can't get up the stairs. He can't walk. Like, how am I going to do this? And they did not care at all, So we left, and for a couple weeks, I was trying to find doctors for him to go see while the insurance was all going through. And, Corpus Christi is a very limited medical option community, right? It's not like being in a major metro. So we went several weeks with it, muscle relaxers. No one would do a scan. It was still just x-rays. And by Thanksgiving, really 3 or 4 weeks, we had decided to send him back to Dallas. Like, we just couldn't find anyone that was helping. And his mother is a pediatric nurse in the DFW area, and my mom was also in the medical industry. So they both got on it together and got him a doctor's appointment at Southwestern. And so he ended up moving back home with his parents about Thanksgiving to try to find a doctor, just to try to find someone that could help him. So they got him into Southwestern and did scans, you know, an MRI and a CAT scan, and found that he had two collapsed vertebrae. So his L4 and L5 had completely collapsed, but it was hidden behind his hip bones or something. So the x-rays weren't showing it, right? Like, or they weren't seeing it or whatever. So then it was like, okay, you know, we kind of had to go down that route of major reconstructive back surgery, you know, no idea why it happened. On all the scans, it looked like he had, they called them hemangiomas, but they're like blood blisters in the spine, right, where the bone marrow is or whatever. And so that's what they thought it was, you know, just totally random, just need to fix it, right, and fix his back. So a whole lot of stuff had to happen between January, and then he finally was able to have reconstructive surgery in August of that same year, of that year. So he went for like 10 months in with two collapsed vertebrae and in a whole lot of pain, right? So I ended up requesting a transfer back up to DFW in January, like in the new year. So I was back up here with him, and we had kind of moved back up here. And then he had that back surgery, and his neurosurgeon at Southwestern, when they were in there doing the surgery, he just thought it looked weird. And so he asked them to do a biopsy on it. And that's how we found out that he had multiple myeloma. So if that surgeon hadn't have thought like, oh, this looks weird, we thought it was a blood blister, but this isn't a blood blister in here, you know, we may have never known. So he came out of that surgery, and we found out he's in stage 4, you know, end of life cancer, multiple myeloma. And he was the youngest person they had seen with multiple myeloma. It's typically a much older male cancer, kind of end of life blood cancer. And he was misdiagnosed for quite a, you know, kind of through all of this because no one was ever looking for it because he was so young, right? So then we find that out, and you know, that was the big shift in our life of, you know, we're a year married. We have a first year wedding anniversary wedding that's happening in like 5 weeks after that back surgery. And really, we ended up still having it, but it was a party and celebration. Like, everyone came out of the woodworks to come see us because everyone found out he was sick, and, you know, so it's just a really great community. I'm so glad we ended up doing it, but just for totally different reasons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when y'all were able to celebrate the 1 year and the you know, the wedding celebration,
Actual wedding, yeah.
yeah, that your parents wanted, how, because he had the surgery, you said 5 weeks prior to that. So what was his mobility like and his overall demeanor? How was he able to manage at that time?
Yeah, that was the hard part. So he was very, I'm not sick. Don't treat me like I'm sick. I'm not going to act like I'm sick. And so he had a mentality of really like, it's just a bump in the road. It's something we have to do, right? Like, we just have to do these things. So he was very adamant. He didn't want to start any of his like chemo treatments or anything until after our wedding. So there was like that 5-week kind of gap that the doctors were really pressuring him to get started. And he was really adamant, like, nope, not going to do it until after we do it. So after our wedding. So we really kind of went through all of that in planning mode, you know, just staying busy and occupied and focused on things that weren't that, right? Yeah. So denial is a really strong thing in those circumstances. At least it was for us. So it was actually after the wedding, the day after is when he checked in to get his port put in. And that was probably the day that it hit us the most, you know, that this is really what's going on. But I will say he had just this crazy ability to either ignore or compartmentalize or just didn't want to be treated differently, wanted to live a normal life. So he did that as much as possible. He hated being in the hospital, hated going to the hospital. He would prefer he would walk around with a chemo bag and pump. He would rather go to work than sit in the oncology units and listening to everyone moan and be miserable, because it's kind of a miserable place, right? Everyone's sick and getting sick. And so he was like, I don't want to be around that because it makes me miserable. He's like, I don't want to be miserable. So he just did everything he could to not put himself in places that affected him like that, I guess. Yeah. So I don't know if that's healthy or not, but that was kind of how that first round, that was kind of how we dealt with it. We were so young and kind of dumb, that we were like, all right, we'll just get through it. Like, it never really registered at that point. It never registered to either of us how really serious that was.
Yeah. When this all started and when you did receive the cancer diagnosis, how did you cope with that intense love that you shared with your husband amidst the illness and the misdiagnosis? Like, I would imagine there's probably a lot of emotions going on there.
Yeah, at first, I shut down. I was like, can't do it, not gonna do it. I don't know how I'm gonna do this. Really went into I'm just gonna leave. Like, I just am gonna leave. And the first time I said that to him, he was like, what happened to sickness and health and, like all those things. And I was like, I just don't think I can handle it. And he was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Like, I'm going to have to handle it. And he kind of got me out of that. It took a couple days, but once we kind of got through, and it was really him saying, well, like, what are you going to do? Like, what else are you going to do? You're just going to leave me and then go and, and he was kind of putting it in real terms, like, that it's life. You can't just end your life or quit your life or walk away from your life, because that's where I was. I was like, don't want to deal with it, don't know how to deal with it, I guess. Yeah. So, we got in therapy and did the things we needed to do. And luckily that was a short-lived bump for me, at that time. And then we really just, I think we were stupid too, and naive, that we were just like, okay, it's just something we're going to have to get through. I don't think it ever registered to us that he was going to die at that point, the first couple years, really.
So when, when you kind of passed over that hurdle and that bump and, he's in a way is like pulling you out of it, going through all that, and you went,
that, right?
Yeah. And then you went through the therapy and just the steps that you needed to take after you kind of went over that hurdle. I mean, I know there were more hurdles, but that initial one, what did the days look like for you? Like, I know you also mentioned that he had to go into chemo, but as far as working and taking care of him and then his ability to do things.
Yeah. So that was probably, it's the hard part looking back at it, but it was also probably my saving grace. So through all of that time, first of all, it was during the time when insurance, if you had a pre-existing condition, they didn't have to cover you. And so because he was on my insurance at the time, I had a significant responsibility to not lose my job, right? And not get fired or not quit. I couldn't leave. I couldn't change, even the company I worked for, because if I did, he literally would die or it would bankrupt us for the rest of our lives, Mm-hmm. And so that was hard because I feel like my choice of my career and my path of my career kind of got taken away. Like, I was in retail. It turned out I'm really good at it and I really enjoyed it. I think a lot of that came out of necessity, But I also worked for a really great company that took really good care of me and Zach specifically. And so I was very committed to the people. So that made it easier. So, the day to day I worked, right? I very much distracted myself with work. So I was very focused. It was the one area I could control, right? It was the one area I could go, I could do something, I could see an effect. It was a positive effect. I could be recognized for it. And I had some kind of control over what was going on. So I really put myself into as many, situations where I could get that fulfillment, of being successful or good at something, and also distracting myself from, everything else that was going on. So it really was work in hospitals. And when he wasn't in the hospital, he was very adamant about staying active. So he still played in his bands. We still did the things that we did with our friends. He just did it with a chemo bag and a bald head, and crazy walking from surgeries. But all of our friends and family, and, we had still do have a really tight-knit group of people in my life. And we all just surrounded each other through the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's huge. Especially and even for, because we don't know what he went through, but just the fact that he's going through all of this and he's still wanting to do the things that he enjoyed and that he loved and that brought fulfillment to him and brought fulfillment to you both as a couple, that I'm sure that was huge at the time, that was something that you definitely needed.
For sure. For sure. So he had a bone marrow transplant. That is a whole in the hospital 6 to 8 weeks kind of ordeal. So we had moved into Baylor, hospital. And then once he was done with that, we kind of just went back to normal, right? Like we just went along with our lives. That first time he was sick, it was probably 3 years total from beginning to we're out of it. And once we got out of it, we just, I got promoted, we bought a house, we started talking about having kids, all that just kind of started going on with our life. And then he was to the point where he was on 6-month checkups, I believe at the time. And we had come in for his checkup and, we're telling the doctor, his doctor was really cool. Zach really liked him. So they did a lot of hanging out and chit-chatting and that kind of stuff. So we were catching Dr. Vance up on, just what Zach had been doing. And we're thinking about having kids, we're at that point. We made it, right? And his doctor just looked at us and this look on his face, he forgot to tell us that he was going to be sterile through all of his treatments. So no one ever told us to bank his sperm or do anything like that. So we were at a place where we were ready to move on with our lives. And it kind of, that part got taken away. And I understood, it wasn't his fault. He was the youngest person they had ever seen. He was the youngest person this doctor had ever treated. The whole university had never treated someone in their 20s for multiple myeloma. So no one even thought to ask because it wasn't a normal protocol that they would do, right? It's typically 65 and older, so it just happened like that. So that was hard.
Yeah. When y'all left that appointment with that doctor, what did the grieving process for the two of you look like?
I am still grieving it.
Of course we were at that age where everyone's having babies, So then all our friends are getting pregnant and having babies. My little sister got pregnant and had a baby. So that was very hard for me. I'm trying to think now. I think it was so much that I don't know that Zach ever really told me about how he was grieving. I think he felt so guilty, Yeah. And so it just kind of got avoided, I guess, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it still haunts me, obviously. But we got past it, it was hard, but it didn't stop us. Like, we kept living our lives and moving on. Somewhat. I think it was the next appointment we went back, and he was out of remission. The cancer was back. So it had come, I'm sorry, I messed with that. So it had come back. And we were about 4 years out from the original, and it had come back, and that's when I shut down. Like, that's when I got to the place of, okay, so he is going to die, this is going to be a thing, and I need to figure out how to live without him. And so that was really hard on both of us, because I put that wall up, this is going to be so bad. I need to start separating myself now, which was a terrible decision, So that happened, and really to the point that I actually moved to California and left him in Texas for a while. I had an opportunity with my job for a promotion, and we sold our house, and I moved to California, and he stayed there for about, February to July, so for several months, which, was terrible and an awful decision on my part, but it was very almost self-preserving. It's that I got to get away, I don't want to deal with it. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you what from February to, you said July, what made you decide I need to go back to him?
Yeah, he actually came to California. So, him and a friend came out in for spring break, and he had a seizure while he was there in California. We were in Sacramento, and we didn't know why or what. So, ambulance and emergency room, and we're in Sacramento, it's the UC Davis system. But we had never been in that system, and he had such a complicated, thing. So it was it ended up being a good hospital to be in. But he had seizures, went to the emergency room, did scans, and he had tumors all over his skull that was pushing on his brain that caused him to have a seizure. So that was in March. He ended up going back to Baylor here in Dallas for a couple months to get set up on treatment. But when that happened, in the emergency room and seeing, we saw the scans and all the lesions, it looked like his skull had moth-eaten holes in him where the tumors were just eating through, right? And so that is actually what kicked me back in to, I cannot abandon this guy. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to live apart and keep pushing him away at the very end, Yeah. So that's how we kind of got back to that, okay, we're just going to do it.
Yeah. You, I know it's hard to relive it, and I appreciate you just sharing your heart in this. One of the things that, you went like you said, you stepped away for just a little bit and then realized the importance of going back and taking care of him. And something that you shared with me too was that in the midst of all of this, like there were definitely hard moments, I'm sure, all the time. But you also said that you never fell victim to that season. Why do you think that you never fell victim?
Yeah, and I will say I clearly did because I crumbled, right? But I didn't stay there. And I think that's the big thing is you have to allow yourself to be able to feel what you feel, and sometimes that can come across as being a victim, but to me it was always I can't stay there. Like I can't live in that. That can't be the skin that I wear, And so Zach is who really got me in that mind frame 100% because we would sit in the waiting room at the hospital and everyone is like, oh, they don't feel good and they're moaning and, they're much older. So now being almost 50, I know what that feels like. And I have those moans, but as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, you're a little impatient with that. Right. And so it was really him, like, we're not going to do that. I don't want to be treated different. I don't want special treatment. I don't want to be miserable like these people that we're seeing. He's like, we're just not going to. And he kind of just wouldn't let me, in him being in that, we're just going to do what we're going to do and not complain about it. That doesn't mean we didn't complain about it. That doesn't mean it wasn't hard and we didn't talk and, all those things. But we just weren't going to let that be who we were. And especially at the end, when we were in Sacramento, like we literally did a bucket list, like at the end it was, you're not going to make it much longer. What have we not done that you want to do? And so we spent the last 6 months of his life doing that stuff, right? And so that keeps you in, like, you're going and experiencing and having, trying to squeeze all those experiences you would have over a lifetime into, 8 months. But that's how. It was hard. The other thing I really had to check myself with, especially in the victim stuff, is my empathy for other people was so little, like none. Because people would, I reference my job a lot because that's where I really kind of put my head in that time. And it was like people would, my cat is sick. I can't come to work today. And I would be like, my husband has cancer and is walking around with a chemo bag. I don't care about your cat. Get in here. You know what I mean? It was my mentality. It's like, but as an adult, as I grew and really learned, and this is probably the thing that makes me want to talk about this stuff the most is my pain is no different than the pain you felt in your pain, whatever that was for you. It just was caused by something different in my life than it was in yours. So once I got to the place of, my cat died, I'm sure to that person that nothing worse has ever happened than my cat died. I'm sure that feels just like my husband died. It's just a different scenario. And once I could recognize like the feelings are the same, the reason for them are different, that shifted my viewpoint in life a whole lot too, for the better, because that was definitely something I hung on to. Even though I wasn't being a victim, I detested other people being a victim too, or trying to play that card, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good perspective shift as well, just of realizing, you were dealing with some immense things, and then somebody else might be dealing with something that is really hard for them, and then recognizing like, okay, it's still hard for them. It's a different type of thing, but it's still like emotion and this sadness and a form of grief as well. So I think that's a good shift for you.
Yeah,
when
that was definitely good. I needed that shift in my life. I think we all do at some point, right?
Right. Yeah. So You said y'all created this bucket list, and when you created it, you said it was about 6 months before he passed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we were in Sacramento, and we had always been in Texas, and we were very Texas people. I don't know if you've ever been a Texan in California, but there's a thing, right? And we were definitely Texas showed up to California. So there was just so much that we hadn't done. We learned how to snowboard. So we went up to Tahoe and learned how to snowboard. We went to Mavericks and we surfed. So one of the best surf spots in the entire world, and we went and surfed it. We spent time in San Francisco. The Mavericks played Golden State in the championship that year, and we went to Oakland and went to the Golden State Mavericks game. Just things we would have never done. Spent all the money, I went into all the debt, didn't care anything about all of that. We just did everything. And then our lease was up on our house that we were renting, and we were looking at other houses and stuff. And as we were looking at other houses, I kind of told him, I was like, why don't I take a leave of absence at work? Why don't we go back to Dallas? Let's go home for 6 or 8 weeks. He was still sick. It was kind of getting there. He hadn't really recognized it was getting to the end yet, I think, but I kind of started recognizing it. So I was like, we just need to go home. All our friends and family are there. Your doctor, that we really loved. And so we decided that's what we were going to do. We packed up the house, put it all in pods. And I say we, but really all of our friends and family came out to California and packed my house up for me and put it all in pods, took the cars. We rented an RV to move the dogs because we had a Great Dane that was too big to fly. And the guys, all of Zach's friends, drove the dog and a little dog, but both dogs back to Texas from California for us because we couldn't fly her. And then he got bad sick, then when we were packing up. And so he was in the hospital, and we didn't have anywhere to live. We had moved out, and we were trying to get him back to Dallas, and we're having a really hard time getting him out of the hospital. They were very concerned about letting him out with his oxygen levels not being at a certain place or whatever. It's a very rigid. And so we were trying to get air flights, a hospitalized. Well, that was going to cost $45,000, right? Wow. So it was we were just looking at any option we could to get him back home, and ended up me throwing a big fit in the middle of the hospital and saying with the head doctor, because they had a team, right, that would come in, and I finally told them, I was like, here's the deal. We're leaving. We're going to get on a plane. He can have an oxygen tank on the plane. I already cleared it with American. We got everything set up. We're going to land and we're going to take him directly to the hospital, but we're leaving. And if you guys don't sign us out, then that means we're going to have to leave against medical advice, and our insurance isn't going to pay for anything after we walk out the door, So I had to plead with them. The day we were talking was the best he had been doing in a week. All his numbers weren't great, but they were the best they had been. And we kind of did the it's now or never, and we're going. And so we did, and they signed us out and signed us directly over into Baylor. So we got all that done in the middle of a night on the red eye, to try to make sure he wasn't around a whole lot of people, whatever. And then got back to Dallas and into the hospital. He was very adamant he was not going to die in a hospital, or, he just wanted to be at home. So we went to my parents' house here locally, and we stayed there. We came right after Valentine's Day. It was probably actually, I think it was a February 29th. I think it was a leap year now that I think about it. But anyway, so we moved in with my parents. He was in the hospital every day. We went back and forth. Sometimes he had to stay, sometimes he didn't. But really it was just
maintenance to keep him comfortable through the end of his life. The cool thing was everyone came, like we had a big party, the band came, we barbecued, everyone had their kids, and it was
Special.
really nice.
Yeah. He, just based on what you have shared about him too, he just sounds really incredible. Just like his perspective throughout the entire, a decade, right? Almost of
Yeah.
going through this. And
Yeah, 8.5 years. 8.5
that's
years.
a long time.
They told him 8 weeks in the hospital at Southwestern, and it was 8.5 years. So it was, that in itself is kind of incredible, right? And I completely give that to his mentality, and just how he lived like that.
Yeah. You said it, 8.5 years of this extremely difficult season, and there were some good moments of going, surfing. Like, I just can't believe that
so
he
many
did that
good
the last few months. Like, doing that was incredible. And in the midst of all this, you watched the love of your life lose his life, and you were there with him, along that journey. So once he finally did pass, how did you allow yourself to grieve?
I probably still am. I've recently learned about chronic grief, so I'm kind of digging into that because I think I probably didn't deal with the grief. Well, I know I didn't deal with the grief very well. So, obviously after the initial shock, it was terrible and horrible. But I will say light in all of it was at his funeral. There were 1,000 people there, standing room only, in this huge Catholic church, and all these people he hadn't seen in 10 or 15 years really showed up and showed up for me. All my friends from all over the country flew in, and it was just such a, I don't know, such a positive to something so negative, right?
Yeah.
Like, there was a light there. There were so many people that he impacted. I will tell you the thing that one of my guiding posts probably the most is that whatever I do, it can't be for nothing. I'm not a big fan of just doing things for the sake of doing things, and I feel very strongly about something positive has to come out of all of this. So he has a really big family. He had 7 brothers and sisters, so there was 8 of them. And we all decided, his family and I and our friends decided to start a foundation. So we started a foundation pretty immediately because we wanted to celebrate his life and we wanted to help other people. So we created a scholarship fund at Arlington High School, which is where all the kids went to school. And we sponsor private lessons for drumline for drummers at the school for kids that can't afford it. And then the other money we give to Baylor University to help clear people's medical debts that don't have insurance or are underinsured. Because there was a lot of times we sat in hospital rooms and listened to people make decisions on their healthcare based on how much it was going to cost, and you can hear that in those rooms. Those curtains don't hide the sounds. So you hear every conversation, and it really hit us that, God, I can't imagine having to make decisions like that. Going back to when all this first happened and we got signed up, I was on an HMO, like, insurance. And my mom kept telling me, you cannot lose this insurance, because when he is in the hospital and stuff, our copay was like $100, but I was getting over $1 million hospital bills, and as a 24-year-old getting and that was just the hospital. That wasn't the doctor and the anesthesiologist and like all the other things. And you get that and you're like, okay, you know, all you can do is laugh at it. It's just a piece of paper, right? But then later, it's like people really are making decisions based on that. So that was our other goal, is to help, you know, not people not have to make decisions like that, right? So we did that. We did a concert every year is what funded it, because, you know, they were musicians or he was a musician, and the band still plays. They're all still together, you know, so we did concerts and raised money and got to where now it's self-sustaining. So we did 13 years of the benefit concert, and now it's self-sustaining. So it'll live on forever. So, you know, so I guess that was kind of how I had to deal with it, right? And deal with the grief, is I have to do something. There has to be something that positive that comes out of this. And I don't, like, the worst thing for me would be for him to be forgotten, you know? And so I want to make sure he stays forward in people's lives. And he is, and he does.
Yeah. What a beautiful tribute to him, and just the fact that you have this foundation to help drumline students and then to help people financially when they're in their lowest moments in their lives and like you said, are trying to make decisions based on what they can and can't do financially. So I think that that's beautiful that you are doing that in honor of Zach. Melanie, I want to also kind of jump a little bit forward as well. That, you know, something you shared with me, that you spent the ages of 32, 35 living like a 20-year-old because you missed your 20s pretty much. And then eventually you had your son. And so you were a single mom in an executive position and in a career. What you quoted to me previously was that it was a career that you never really wanted. And so what did it take for you to leave this career? And then also, just due to time, because I know you've got to move on with your day, I do also want to hear how then you were introduced to the Snapology franchise.
Sure. So you had asked how I grieved. You know, once I kind of got through that first initial grief and, you know, kind of felt like I was contributing and, you know, there was something positive coming out of it. Well, in hindsight, I look back and, you know, I basically just started living my 30s like I was in my 20s. You know, I spent my 20s taking care of someone that was dying, and it wasn't, you know, maybe that specific, but it definitely was like that. So I kind of found myself for the first time free, you know, to do what I wanted and go where I wanted, and really went off the deep end, you know, in a not healthy way, and ended up pregnant, right? So here I am with the child I never thought I would have, because that was taken away from us, you know, before. So I kind of felt like it was a blessing, and it definitely got me to stop, you know, and just stop and be still and be with yourself and figure out, like, get off this train, because I was definitely on the crazy train at that point. And then had my son, at 35, right? So here I am having a kid late in life, and went about my career and all that stuff. And as my son was getting older, you know, he was having issues in school, and, you know, just stuff was coming up. And I was traveling. I was still in retail at a different job. After Zach passed away, I was able to kind of move on in my career, but still in the same industry. But just, you know, going through living our lives and kind of doing okay. And then my son, like I said, was having issues. And we found out he was diagnosed with autism. So at 7, right before his 7th birthday, you know, we found that out. And I ended up leaving my career. Him having so much issues was I couldn't be at my top in my career when he was having so much problems at home, especially because I was traveling. So I was basically just not here, right? So I had to make a choice and make a decision that, you know, I've got to put my kid first and be present and be here, you know, to help and get all this figured out. So I left my career in 2019 and decided I was just going to focus on him. I'd kind of set myself up over the, probably 5 or 6 years prior. Financially, I was doing really well. I was in an executive position. So, I had done well for myself and we were okay. And I was in a place I could, and I understand how lucky I am that I was in a place that I could just step away and kind of figure it out. So that's what I did, right? So that summer, I left in February. And we got through, therapies and diagnosis and all that kind of stuff during the school year. And that summer, I was looking for activities for him to do. And he is hyper focused on Lego at the time, but really building and creating. And he just has this like amazing mind. And he's so smart and just sees things in a different way. So I was trying to find stuff for him to do and couldn't find anything that had teachers or adults in the room that really knew how to work with non-typical learners, right? And so we were challenged all summer to find things that really fit for him. But the more I looked around at all these kids, there's so many kids just like him, little quirky boys that maybe aren't into sports, but, love Pokemon and all the other things, right? So that summer, it just hit me. I was really struggling trying to figure out what kind of job to go into that would allow me the flexibility to be present for my son. I knew I couldn't work at 8 to 5. That just wasn't going to be the world that we were going to live in. So that's where I found Snapology when I was looking for things for him to do. And I had always run businesses, all over the country. So I was like, maybe this is an opportunity to see if I can do it on my own, without a big major corporation, and all the pocketbooks that come with that, right? So I started Snapology locally. So that's what I did. Of course, that was 6 months before the pandemic started, right? So here I am with a brand new business, no other income, going into a global pandemic. That was the one thing I didn't bank on. I planned for everything else. I did not have global pandemic on my bingo card of failures. Yeah. So I did that. So we got through that. Got through COVID, really by just showing up in the community and just doing a lot of free stuff, and a lot of these kids need a place to go, and I can give them that place and give them a structure and education, but it's fun and it's with toys that they're already loving and engaged. So I've been doing that since 2019. And then right now I am opening a new STEAM Enrichment Center. So it's called Spark Lab, where I will have Snapology will be able to run classes, but I'm going to have a lot of other. And what I'm really looking for is like moms starting their side hustles that are, turning into small businesses, or maybe they are a small business and they want to grow even more. I want all those people to be able to offer their services and their classes and the things they do with kids all under my roof, so that for parents, you really have kind of a one-stop shop where your kid can come, but every day there'll be different activities and different categories that they can choose from to really pursue their interest in STEM. So we'll have technology, video game design classes, and we'll have movie making classes and animation classes, and then of course all my Lego classes. Lots of robotics and technology. So kind of a house, where everyone can be a community, and we can support all of the kids in our area. So that's my next venture. I am moving in April, actually, and we will be open in May in South Lake.
Oh my goodness. That's fantastic. That's a fantastic concept. And so a few more questions. So you cut out a little bit, but I know that I'll be able to retrieve some of that. So I couldn't hear all of it. And so I don't think you mentioned this part, but you mentioned for like, you want to provide an opportunity for like moms or whoever who wants to do like a little side hustle to teach. So would they just be able to come in and teach for an hour or 2 hours, like once a week? Or do you have the structure of what that looks like just yet?
Yeah. So what I'm looking for, ideally, I would like to have like science type classes on Mondays, and then technology type classes on Tuesdays, engineering on Wednesday, art classes on Thursday, and then probably like some kind of tutoring or, other service availability for students on Fridays. We may not land on those days, but those are kind of the categories that I'm looking at. So really kind of how a mobile business works with Snapology, because it's been 100% mobile, is partners will hire us to come in and do classes for their students or kids, right? So kind of under that same model, I'm looking for service providers, teachers, businesses that provide STEM enrichment for all ages, to give them a home to be able to offer their services. So we'll take enrollment, we'll have members, the classes will be offered, it depends on the class really, but usually kind of hourly every week. And then when school's out, we'll do workshops and camps and that kind of stuff too. So my big focus with it is the inclusion. So anyone that comes in and offers classes, my minimum requirement is open to all, that we are inclusive to everyone that comes in. It doesn't matter your race, your socioeconomics. I don't care what pronouns you use. I don't care, what learning type you are and what disabilities you have. I want to have adults and experts in the building that can welcome and create amazing experiences for every kid that walks in the door. Yeah. And then also have a place where, as a small business owner, you're working alongside peers and other people that are kind of doing that thing like you are, right? Like trying to get your business off the ground and get to your customers and figure out marketing and, your margins and your profits and, just having someone and people around that speak that same language and are doing the same thing that you can bounce ideas off of. That's a really important aspect of that to me. So the whole front of the center I'm literally going to put my dining table in the front lobby, and we're going to set it up so that everyone can just sit and have coffee while your kids are in class back there, or sit and work, or sit and ask questions. And it's set up like it's really going to be like my dining room.
Mm-hmm. What a great concept. Now, one more question about it. What's the name of the STEAM learning
lab?
Spark Lab.
Spark
okay.
Labs.
Spark Lab.
Plural. We will end up with 3. So this is my first.
Okay. Now, so you said probably roughly an hour class, and you said it was open to all ages. Is it going to be in the middle of the day, or is it going to be more towards after school's out?
Yeah, we'll do all of the above, really. So I would love to I know Snapology will, I think the movie making will also. I'm really trying to get one of the youth tech providers to be able to do homeschool classes, like school or classes during times that homeschool kids would need and want. And then, after school on weekends, we'll do birthday parties on weekends and, special events and that kind of stuff. And then have it be a space that I want it to be a community space. I do better when I'm surrounded by like-minded people, right? That
absolutely.
That I can bounce ideas off of.
Mm-hmm. Where can, for people that are interested, where can they find all that information?
And you may want to edit this somehow. We literally have not put it out publicly yet. So it's coming out next week is our big launches. So by the time this airs, we'll have a website, and I really don't even have that right now.
Okay. Well, when you do because your episode will be released either early May or end of April, so you will be already out. So I'll get that information, and we'll provide the website
and
for
I'll
you.
just CC you on it next week when we launch everything. You'll find out too.
Okay, perfect. That's great. Well, I'm really excited, Melanie, for this next venture that you have coming up, and then just how you're partnering with Snapology. You know, you've gone through a lot, and I know we spent the bulk of our conversation talking about just the really intense part of what you've had to experience. And so I want to thank you just for sharing that, because it's really hard to be open and I mean, really let yourself out there for people to hear the hard stuff of what you went
Yeah.
through. And, you know, from a young marriage to caring for your husband for almost a decade, becoming a widow, reliving your 20s and your 30s, the birth of your son, you know, you had to leave your career at 43 to owning a business, and now you're starting a new business very soon. You've learned a lot along the way.
Yeah.
With all of that, with all the things that you've learned, I would love the last question. This is going to be my last question for you. It's the question I ask all of my guests. So, with all of that, if you could encourage one woman who feels blocked to pursue a dream or a goal, or just pursue life based on her age or her life circumstance, what would you tell her?
I think about this a lot, and it's why I don't mind and I like talking about my experiences, because my life has been messy. You know, I don't know why and I don't know how, but it was chosen for me that I was going to live this messy life, right? I think about sometimes when I'm in the messy, I stop and think, like, why am I here? What's my purpose, right? And more times than not, when I look back at it, it's because I believe Zach ended up, my husband and I went through all that because I could handle it, because I know how to advocate. I have a voice. I'm not afraid to use it, you know. And so I think if I could encourage people, like, even when you're in the crazy, if you can stop and think, like, what is your purpose here, and what are your strengths, and who are you as a person, and how can you use that to help get you through it, right? I think that other advice that I would give, or if I could tell even, you know, myself along that journey, is you can't stop. You know, I think one of the things that always was so weird to me, that after he died, people would ask, like, how are you doing? I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it. I don't know, you know, and it's very well meaning and, you know, empathetic, but it always made me go, like, well, what are you going to do? Like, what are you actually going to do? I could really lay down and just not do anything for a week or two, you know, maybe. But, like, really, what are you going to do? You just have to put one foot in front of the other, you know, and it's going to suck. It's not always fun, but you really don't have a choice, you know. I mean, you do. Your choice is nothing or something. And I just always encourage you, while you may not always be there in the moment, to be like, okay, here's my something, find it. You know, don't let yourself sit in that messy place for too long, because you have to do something. Like, doing nothing isn't an option, right? The other thing that I would say is there's no way I would have made it through all of this without the people that were around me. And I learned really young to lean on people around you, and that the people that are around you are so important, and choose those people very wisely, you know, and don't let people into your space that are going to take away and not give, right? But I look at, like, all the people that we were hanging out with that summer, you know, before I was moving off to Corpus that Labor Day, they are all still in my life right now, you know, and we're 20 years later, and we're all a very tight knit group of family, because we all kind of went through it together, you know, like, none of us had to experience it individually. And that is the power of people, that when you can go through things together with people that you love and you trust, you can get through it, you know, and you can still have fun, and you can still play in your band, and you can still, you know, do all these other things when you have the people around you that love it and love you and love what we're doing. I learned really young, right, to not take people or time for granted. Time was always the thing that we never had enough time. We knew we weren't going to have enough time, so we were trying to fill that time consistently. And, you know, that's nothing, you'll never get that back. I'll never get that time back. No one will, right? So the stopping to me is the part that I'm like, you can't stop. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. You got to get up. You got to do something. It doesn't have to change the world today, but you got to do something. It's got to be for something. Don't just quit, right? So no matter how messy it is, you got to get up and go. You have to keep going. That's my advice.
I like how you said you can't change, you may not change the world today, but you just got to do something. Yeah. Well, Melanie, thank you again so much for just your vulnerability, sharing your story. I'm excited for this business that you're about to launch and your work already that you've been doing with Snapology. So, Melanie, thank you so much for joining me today on the More Than Your Age podcast.
No problem. Thanks so much for having me.